The evening rush at Bellini's was in full swing. The clinking of silverware against fine china plates filled the air, mixing with the gentle hum of conversation and occasional bursts of laughter. The soft golden lighting cast a warm glow over the white tablecloths and crystal glasses, making even the simplest meal feel like a special occasion. For Lucia Delgado, it was just another Friday night of running between tables, balancing heavy trays, and keeping a smile plastered on her face no matter how tired she felt. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and despite being on her feet for nearly 6 hours already, she moved with practiced grace between the closely set tables. "Another bottle of the Cabernet for table 12, she murmured to Miguel, the bartender, as she loaded her tray with appetizers. Her shoulders ached, and she still had 3 hours left on her double shift. "You look dead on your feet," Miguel said, placing the wine on her tray. "Second double this week?" "Third," Lucia sighed. "Rent's due next week and Mom's medication isn't going to pay for itself." She straightened her black uniform vest and lifted the tray with a practiced motion. No time for complaints. The tips at Bellini's were good, if you provided flawless service. As she delivered the wine to table 12, she noticed a stir near the entrance. Heads turned and whispers spread through the restaurant like ripples in water. Lucia didn't need to look to know who had arrived. Alexander Reed, tech billionaire and the most demanding customer Bellini's ever served, was making his entrance. Lucia had served him once before and hoped Diane or Thomas would get his table tonight. The last time he'd sent back his steak twice and complained that the lighting was too harsh above his table. Yet he'd left a $500 tip, so the staff put up with his quirks. "Lucia," Thomas hissed, appearing suddenly beside her. "Reed specifically requested your section." Her heart sank. "Why? I barely spoke 10 words to him last time," Thomas shrugged. "He's with 6 guests. Important clients, he says, and he wants you." "Don't mess this up. He spends more here in one night than most customers do in a month." Lucia nodded, taking a deep breath as she watched the maitre d' escort Reed and his party to the large corner table in her section. Reed walked with the easy confidence of a man who had never worried about money. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her entire year's rent, his salt and pepper hair perfectly styled. She approached the table with professional warmth. "Good evening, Mr. Reed. Welcome back to Bellini's." His eyes flickered up, assessing her briefly. "Ah, yes. Lucia, correct? Good memory for faces, essential quality in your line of work." He wasn't asking a question, just stating facts as he saw them. "Tonight's special is a pan-seared sea bass with a lemon butter sauce and roasted asparagus," she recited, handing out the leather-bound menus to his guests, 4 men and 2 women, all in business attire, all with that same look of comfortable wealth. "We'll start with 2 bottles of the Crystal," Reed said without looking at the wine list. "And tell Giorgio I expect his best tonight. I'm celebrating closing a rather significant acquisition." "Of course, sir. I'll let the chef know right away." Lucia moved smoothly away from the table, silently calculating the bill that was already mounting. 2 bottles of Cristal alone would come to over $1,000. As she relayed the order to Miguel, she noticed something odd. The usual soft piano music that filled the restaurant was missing. "Where's Anthony tonight?" she asked, referring to the regular pianist. Miguel grimaced. "Called in sick at the last minute. Some stomach bug. Management's been scrambling to find a replacement, but no luck so far." Lucia frowned. The live piano music was part of Bellini's charm, something Reed had commented on favorably during his last visit. "Mr. Reed's not going to be happy about that," she muttered. True to her prediction, when she returned to the table with the champagne, Reed immediately noticed the absence. "Where's the pianist?" he asked as she carefully popped the cork on the first bottle. "I'm sorry, sir. Anthony is unwell tonight. Management has been trying to find a replacement." Reed's frown deepened, creating lines across his forehead. "Unacceptable. The ambiance is part of why I bring clients here." "I understand, sir. I'll speak to the manager again." Lucia poured the champagne with practiced ease, keeping her expression neutral despite the knot forming in her stomach. Difficult customers could turn a good night bad in seconds. Throughout the next hour, Lucia moved efficiently between her tables, taking special care with Reed's party. They ordered lavishly: caviar starters, truffle risotto, aged steaks. Reed continued to mention the missing music each time she approached. his irritation growing more obvious. During a brief moment by the service station, Lucia overheard two other servers talking. "Remember when you mentioned playing piano in college?" Ben asked Diane. "Reed's driving Lucia crazy about the missing pianist. Maybe you could step in?" Diane laughed nervously. "No way. I played for fun in my dorm. Nothing like what Anthony does. I'd make a fool of myself." Lucia thought nothing more of it until she returned to Reed's table with their main courses. As she set down his perfectly cooked ribeye, Reed looked up at her with an unexpected intensity. "One of the other servers mentioned you play piano," he said. Lucia blinked, confused. "Sir, don't play dumb. I overheard the staff talking. You mentioned to someone that you played piano." Lucia realized he'd misheard, thinking the conversation had been about her rather than Diane. Before she could correct him, Reed continued, "Since your establishment can't be bothered to provide the experience I'm paying for, perhaps you could fill in." The table fell silent. Reed's guests looked uncomfortable, but no one contradicted him. "Mr. Reed, there's been a misunderstanding. I'm offering you an opportunity." Reed cut in, his voice low but firm. "I'll add $1,000 tip if you play just a few pieces." Lucia's cheeks burned. $1,000 would cover her mother's medication for 2 months. But the truth was she hadn't just casually played piano. She had once been serious about it. Serious enough to earn a scholarship to the city's conservatory before her mother's illness had forced her to drop out and work full-time. "It wasn't me they were talking about," she started to explain, but Reed's expression hardened. "Are you refusing?" The question hung in the air between them. Just then, Thomas appeared at her elbow. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, sensing the tension. Reed turned his attention to Thomas. "Your waitress apparently plays piano, and I'm requesting that she provide the music your restaurant advertises as part of its experience." Thomas looked at Lucia with confusion. Then understanding dawned in his eyes. "Mr. Reed, I believe there's been a mix-up. It was another server who—" "Actually," Lucia interrupted, making a split-second decision, "I do play." Both men looked at her with surprise. "Really?" Thomas asked. Lucia nodded slowly. "I haven't in a long time, but yes." The truth was she missed it desperately. The piano had been her escape, her joy, her dream. She'd sold her upright 2 years ago to help with her mother's hospital bills. The thought of touching those keys again sent a shiver of both longing and fear through her. "Excellent," Reed said, sitting back with satisfaction. "We're waiting." Thomas pulled her aside, speaking in a hushed tone. "You don't have to do this. He's being unreasonable." "It's fine," Lucia replied, though her heart was racing. $1,000 tip, Thomas, and—" She hesitated. "I actually miss playing." Thomas studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "If you're sure. But if he's just setting you up to humiliate you, I'll step in." Lucia handed Thomas her order pad and made her way to the grand piano in the corner. It sat on a small raised platform, normally occupied by Anthony's confident presence. Now it waited, black and gleaming under the spotlight, both inviting and intimidating. The restaurant hadn't exactly fallen silent, but she felt the weight of attention as she approached. Reed's table watched her intently. Other diners glanced over with curiosity. Her legs felt strangely weak as she sat on the bench, adjusting it to the right height. The polished keys stared back at her, both familiar and foreign after so long. She placed her fingertips lightly on them, feeling their cool smoothness. What should she play? Anthony usually performed light jazz and popular classics. Her training had been primarily classical, but she knew that might not be what Reed expected. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a moment, and began. Her fingers found Debussy's Clair de Lune, a piece she had played so often it lived in her muscle memory. The first notes were tentative, slightly clumsy as her fingers remembered their purpose. But by the end of the first phrase, something shifted inside her. The restaurant, Reed, her double shift, her worries, all of it faded away. There was only the music, flowing from some untouched place inside her that had been waiting. Dormant, but not dead. Her hands moved with increasing confidence, finding the delicate balance between strength and tenderness that the piece required. When the final notes faded, Lucia opened her eyes, somewhat startled to find herself in Bellini's rather than alone in a practice room. The restaurant had gone completely quiet. Even the kitchen staff had paused to listen, standing in the doorway to the dining room. At Reed's table, the billionaire sat motionless, his steak forgotten, a strange expression on his face. It wasn't the smug satisfaction she had expected, but something more complex, surprise certainly, but also something that looked almost like recognition. Across the restaurant, in that moment of silence before the applause began, their eyes met. Something passed between them, an understanding perhaps. The recognition of something authentic in a world where both of them, in their different ways, had learned to perform. The applause began slowly, first from a table near the piano, then spreading through the restaurant like a wave. Lucia blinked, coming back to herself, suddenly aware of all the eyes on her. Her cheeks flushed with warmth. She hadn't performed for an audience in years, not since her recital at the conservatory before everything fell apart. Thomas approached the piano, a look of astonishment on his face. "Lucia, that was—" He shook his head at a loss for words. "Why didn't you ever mention you could play like that?" She gave a small shrug. It never came up. The truth was more complicated. Talking about the piano meant talking about dreams she'd been forced to abandon, about the life she might have had. "Play something else," called a woman from a nearby table. Other diners nodded in agreement. Lucia looked over at Reed's table. The billionaire was watching her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable, but there was something else in his expression now. Curiosity, perhaps. He gave her a small nod. She turned back to the keys, considering what to play next. Something told her that Reed and his guests wouldn't be satisfied with the gentle background music Anthony usually provided. Without fully intending to, her fingers found the opening chords of Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor. It was a bold choice. Dramatic, technically demanding, emotional. The piece required strength and precision, qualities she hadn't been sure she still possessed. But as she played, something awakened in her. The years of practice, the countless hours spent repeating passages until her fingers ached. The deep love of music that had once been the center of her life. None of it had truly disappeared. The piece built to its thunderous climax. Her hands flying across the keys with a confidence that surprised even her. When she finished, breathing hard as though she'd been running, the restaurant erupted in applause again, louder this time. A few people even stood. Lucia stood up, feeling slightly dazed. She gave a quick, awkward bow, unsure of the proper protocol in this strange situation. She was supposed to be serving food, not performing Rachmaninoff. As she stepped down from the piano platform, intending to return to her duties, Reed beckoned her over to his table. His guests were looking at her with new interest, whispering among themselves. "That was unexpected," Reed said as she approached. His tone gave away nothing, but there was a new alertness in his eyes. "Thank you, sir," Lucia replied, falling back on the polite formality of her waitress role. "Would you like me to bring fresh drinks?" "Where did you study?" he asked, ignoring her question. Lucia hesitated. "I had a scholarship at the Central City Conservatory. I didn't finish." "Clearly a waste of potential," Reed remarked. It wasn't clear if he meant her failure to complete her education, or the fact that someone with her talent was waiting tables. One of the women at the table, an elegant blonde in her 50s, leaned forward. "Why would you leave the conservatory? That's not an opportunity many people get." The question stung, though Lucia knew it wasn't meant to be cruel. These were people for whom financial hardship was likely an abstract concept. "Family circumstances," she said simply. She had no intention of sharing her life story with these strangers, especially not while on the clock. "Will there be anything else, Mr. Reed?" "Yes," Reed said. "Go back to the piano. I want you to play throughout our meal." Lucia glanced at Thomas, who was hovering nearby. "Sir, I'm supposed to be serving." "I'll double the tip," Reed cut in. 2,000. "And I'll speak to your manager about compensating you properly for the entertainment." Thomas stepped forward. "Mr. Reed, while we appreciate your enthusiasm for Lucia's playing, she has other tables. I'll cover the lost tips from her tables as well," Reed said dismissively. He was a man used to solving problems with money. "This is a business opportunity for your establishment, Mr. Thomas." "Thomas Chen. I'm the floor manager tonight." "Mr. Chen, you're currently without a pianist. I'm offering to pay for one, and giving your customers an unexpected treat." "I fail to see the downside." Lucia watched this exchange with growing discomfort. They were discussing her as if she weren't standing right there. Yet part of her desperately wanted to return to the piano. Those few minutes of playing had awakened something she'd tried to bury for years. "It should be Lucia's choice," said the blonde woman suddenly. She gave Lucia a kind smile. "Would you like to play for us, dear?" The question took Lucia by surprise. It had been so long since anyone had asked what she wanted. Yes, she admitted. "I would like to play, but I have responsibilities here." The restaurant manager appeared, drawn by the commotion. After a brief huddle with Thomas, he approached the table with a wide smile. "Mr. Reed, we'd be delighted to have Lucia provide music for your party tonight. We'll arrange for her tables to be covered." He turned to Lucia. "If you're comfortable with this arrangement?" She nodded, a strange mix of emotions washing over her. Excitement at the chance to play again. Anxiety about performing after so long. Embarrassment at being the center of attention. And underneath it all, a faint spark of something she hadn't felt in years. Joy. "Excellent," Reed said with finality. "Now, about our steaks." As the conversation at the table returned to business, Lucia made her way back to the piano. Thomas caught up with her halfway there. "Are you sure about this?" he asked quietly. "Reed can be difficult, I'm sure." Her voice was steadier than she expected. "Who's covering my tables?" "Diane and Ben will split them." The manager's thrilled. He thinks this could become a regular thing. Waitstaff with hidden talents or something. Lucia laughed despite herself. "Let's see if I can make it through tonight first." Over the next 2 hours, Lucia played everything she could remember. Chopin Nocturne, Mozart sonatas, even a few jazz standards that Anthony had left in the bench. She was rusty, hitting wrong notes occasionally, struggling with passages that had once been second nature. But with each piece, her confidence grew. The restaurant filled completely with people even waiting at the bar for tables. Word had somehow spread. The waitress at Bellini's was playing classical piano, really playing, not just background music. Lucia was vaguely aware of phones being held up, people recording her performance, but she tried to focus only on the music. Between pieces, she would steal glances at Reed's table. Their meal had turned into a lingering affair, with multiple bottles of wine and animated conversation. Reed himself watched her with an expression she couldn't quite read. It wasn't the casual appreciation of someone enjoying ambient music. There was something more calculating in his gaze. During a brief pause while she flexed her fingers, which were beginning to cramp from the unaccustomed exercise, the restaurant manager appeared at her side with a glass of water. "You're bringing in more business than we've had in months," he said, beaming. "Whatever Reed's paying you, we'll match it if you'll consider doing this regularly. Maybe Friday and Saturday nights?" The offer stunned her. "I don't know," she stammered. "This wasn't planned." "Think about it," he said. "No pressure. But you've got a gift, and it's bringing people in." As the evening wore on, Lucia fell into a rhythm, letting the music carry her. There was pain in it, reminders of what might have been. The future she had planned before her mother's diagnosis changed everything. But there was healing, too. Each note felt like reclaiming a piece of herself she'd thought was gone forever. Reed's party finally prepared to leave around midnight. As they stood gathering expensive coats and bags, Reed approached the piano. He waited until she finished the piece she was playing, a gentle Sati Gymnopédie. "You're untrained," he said without preamble. "Or rather, your training was interrupted. There are rough edges, technical issues. But there's something else there." Lucia wasn't sure how to respond. It wasn't exactly a compliment, but it wasn't criticism either. "How long ago did you stop playing?" he asked. "Almost 5 years." He nodded as if confirming something to himself. "You need a teacher. And a better instrument than this." He gestured dismissively at the piano, which, while well-maintained, was showing its age. "Mr. Reed, I have connections at the Central City Symphony, people who teach master classes. I could make a call." Lucia stared at him, trying to understand what was happening. "Why would you do that?" Reed seemed genuinely puzzled by the question. "Because talent shouldn't be wasted. It's inefficient." A strange answer, but perhaps not surprising from a man who had built his fortune on maximizing efficiency in tech systems. "I have commitments," Lucia said carefully. "My mother is ill. That's why I left the conservatory." "Those circumstances haven't changed." "Everything has a solution," Reed replied with the easy confidence of someone who had never encountered a problem money couldn't solve. "Here." He pulled out a business card and wrote something on the back. "My private number. Call it tomorrow. We'll discuss options." Before she could respond, He reached into his wallet and placed a thick fold of bills on top of the piano. As promised, for tonight's performance. With that, he turned and rejoined his party. Lucia watched them leave, the card heavy in her hand. She looked down at the money. It was far more than the $2,000 he'd promised, at least $5,000 in $100 bills. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked it up. $5,000. It would cover her mother's medication for almost a year. It would fix the leaky roof in their small house. It might even allow her to reduce her shifts at Bellini's to have time for what? For playing again? For daring to dream again? The restaurant had emptied out. Only the cleaning staff remained, giving her curious glances as they began to clear tables. Thomas approached with her coat and bag. "Quite a night," he said, smiling. "Need a ride home?" Lucia looked down at the card in her hand, then at the money. She tucked both into her pocket. "Thanks, but I think I'll walk. I need some air." As she stepped out into the cool night, the melody still echoed in her head. For the first time in years, the weight on her shoulders felt a little lighter. She wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, or what Reed's offer really meant, but something had changed tonight. Something had begun. And as she walked home through the quiet streets, Lucia allowed herself to wonder, just a little, about possibilities. Lucia woke the next morning to the sound of her phone buzzing repeatedly. Groggy and disoriented, she reached for it, squinting at the screen. 12 missed calls from Thomas, 4 from the restaurant manager, and dozens of text messages from coworkers she barely spoke to. What on earth? She sat up, rubbing her eyes when she remembered. The piano, Reed, the money still tucked in her purse. It hadn't been a dream. Before she could check any of the messages, her phone rang again. "Thomas, have you seen it?" he asked without preamble when she answered. "Seen what?" Lucia's voice was still rough with sleep. "You're everywhere. Someone posted videos of you playing last night. They're going viral. The restaurant's phone has been ringing nonstop. People wanting reservations, asking if the piano waitress will be performing again." Lucia felt a cold wave of panic. "Videos? Who posted videos?" "Everyone, apparently. Check your social media." Lucia rarely used social media, but she opened her neglected accounts to find hundreds of notifications. With growing disbelief, she found clips of herself playing Rachmaninoff, Chopin, and Debussy at Bellini's piano. The most popular one had over 200,000 views already and was climbing by the minute. The comments ranged from admiration to disbelief. Who is she? Why is she working as a waitress? This is what raw talent looks like. The rich guy making her play was awful, but wow, she showed him. I'm crying. When she plays Rachmaninoff, you can feel every emotion. Lucia closed the app, her hand trembling slightly. She hadn't sought this attention. Hadn't planned for it. Wasn't prepared for it, her mother called from the next room. "Lucia, are you awake? There's something on the TV about you." With a growing sense of unreality, Lucia walked to her mother's bedroom. Elena Delgado sat propped up in bed, her frail body dwarfed by pillows, the local morning news playing on the small television in the corner. "Video that's captivated viewers overnight," the news anchor was saying. A waitress at upscale restaurant Bellini's revealed an extraordinary hidden talent when a customer, reportedly tech billionaire Alexander Reed, demanded she play the piano. They cut to a clip of Lucia playing, her face intense with concentration. Lost in the music, "Mom, I can explain," Lucia began, but her mother held up a hand, her eyes fixed on the screen. The unidentified waitress, who sources say had formal training at Central City Conservatory before dropping out, displayed virtuoso-level skill that has music experts buzzing. "The video has already attracted attention from..." Elena muted the TV and turned to her daughter, eyes wide. "That's really you? Playing like that again, after all this time?" Lucia nodded, sitting on the edge of the bed. "It just happened. This customer thought I was someone else, someone who'd mentioned playing piano. He was upset there was no music and demanded I play. I was going to explain the mix-up, but then..." She trailed off, remembering the moment she'd decided to sit at the piano instead. "I missed it so much, Mom." Elena reached for her daughter's hand. Her fingers were thin, the skin almost translucent after years of illness, but her grip was surprisingly strong. "You were meant to play. I've always known that. I was meant to take care of you," Lucia countered gently. This was an old conversation. When Elena had first been diagnosed, Lucia had insisted on leaving school to care for her mother and earn money for treatments. Elena had fought against it, but eventually relented when the financial reality became clear. And you have. Elena's eyes filled with tears. Too much. At too high a cost. Before Lucia could respond, her phone rang again. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. Ms. Delgado? The voice was crisp, professional. This is Vivian Shaw, Mr. Reed's assistant. He's expecting your call this morning. Lucia had almost forgotten Reed's card. His instructions to call. Yes. I was going to call. Mr. Reed would like to meet with you today. His schedule has an opening at 11 a.m. Can you be at Reed Tower downtown by then? It wasn't really a question. Lucia glanced at the clock, 9:15 a.m. Yes, I can do that. Excellent. Ask for me at the security desk in the lobby. The woman hung up without waiting for a response. Elena raised her eyebrows. Reed Tower? That glass skyscraper downtown? Apparently. Lucia showed her mother the money Reed had given her the night before. He paid me this to play, and he said something about connections with the symphony, about teachers. Be careful, mija, Elena warned. Men like that don't give without expecting something in return. I know. Lucia stood up. I'll be careful, but I have to see what he wants. 2 hours later, Lucia stood in the soaring lobby of Reed Tower feeling desperately out of place. The space was all gleaming marble and steel, with a massive sculpture of intertwining metal ribbons hanging from the ceiling. Everyone who passed wore tailored suits or designer dresses. Lucia had put on her best outfit, black pants and a blue blouse she wore to job interviews, but she knew she didn't belong. At the security desk, a guard looked her over with barely concealed skepticism. Can I help you? I'm here to see Mr. Reed. Vivian Shaw is expecting me. Lucia Delgado. The guard checked his computer, eyebrows rising in surprise when he found her name. 42nd floor. Ms. Shaw will meet you there. The elevator whisked her upward so quickly her ears popped. When the doors opened, she stepped into a reception area with panoramic views of the city. A sleek white desk curved across the space behind which sat a woman with a silver-gray bob and rimless glasses. Ms. Delgado, she said, standing. I'm Vivian Shaw. Thank you for being punctual. Mr. Reed appreciates timeliness. She led Lucia down a hallway lined with modern art. He's finishing a call. Can I get you anything? Water? Coffee? No, thank you, Lucia replied, fighting the urge to fidget with her clothes. She felt like an imposter, as if at any moment someone would realize she didn't belong here and escort her out. Vivian stopped outside a set of double doors. A word of advice, she said, lowering her voice. Mr. Reed doesn't waste time on pleasantries. Be direct with your answers. Don't ramble. He values efficiency above all else. She knocked once, then opened the door. Ms. Delgado is here, sir. Reed's office was vast, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the city skyline. One wall was covered in screens displaying charts, graphs, and scrolling numbers. Reed himself sat behind a desk made of what appeared to be a single slab of polished concrete. He looked different in daylight, in his own territory. More formidable somehow. He wore a simple charcoal sweater that probably cost more than Lucia's monthly rent. Sit, he said, gesturing to a chair opposite his desk. No greeting. No small talk. Just as Vivian had warned. Lucia sat, folding her hands in her lap to keep them from trembling. You've seen the videos, I assume? Reed said. It wasn't a question. Yes. Your playing has attracted attention. Professional attention. He tapped a tablet on his desk. I've had inquiries from 3 music directors and a dean at the conservatory you abandoned. Lucia bristled at his choice of words. I didn't abandon anything. I made a necessary choice. A choice that wasted your talent, Reed replied bluntly. But that's in the past. I'm interested in the future. He leaned forward slightly. I've made arrangements for you to audition for the Central City Symphony's mentorship program. It's designed for promising musicians who lack conventional career paths. The audition is next week. Lucia stared at him, struggling to process his words. Why are you doing this? Reed seemed genuinely puzzled by the question. I told you. Talent shouldn't be wasted. It's inefficient, but why me? You don't know me. I'm just a waitress who happened to be in your section. A waitress who plays Rachmaninoff with more feeling than half the professional pianists I've heard. Reed countered. I recognize value when I see it. And I have the means to develop it. He paused. You mentioned family circumstances. Your mother is ill? The question caught Lucia off guard. Yes, she has lupus. It's been difficult. The medical bills? Healthcare in this country is broken. Reed cut in with unexpected vehemence. Another inefficient system. He made a dismissive gesture. I've arranged for your mother to be seen by specialists at University Hospital. They have an excellent rheumatology department. All expenses covered. Lucia felt as if the floor had dropped out from under her. You can't just... That's too much. I don't understand what you want in return. For the first time, Reed seemed uncertain. He tapped his fingers on the desk, a brief rhythm. When I was 10, my piano teacher told my parents I had perfect pitch and exceptional potential. My father said music was a hobby, not a career. I was to follow him into business. A shadow passed across his face. I complied. Built all this. He gestured at the office, the tower, his empire, and I've never regretted it. But I've always wondered about the path not taken. He stood abruptly, walking to the window. Consider it an investment. In 5 years, when you're performing with the symphony, I'll have excellent seats. That's all I want in return. Lucia didn't believe him, not entirely. People didn't give away medical care and career opportunities without expecting something. But the offer was too good to refuse, especially for her mother's sake. The audition, she said slowly. I'm out of practice. 5 years is a long time. Which is why you'll start working with Dr. Lin tomorrow, Reed replied, turning back to her. She's the best piano instructor in the city. Retired from performing, but she takes on special students occasionally. She's agreed to work with you daily until the audition. The speed at which he'd arranged all this was dizzying. And Bellini's my job. A waste of your time now. Give your notice. I've set up a stipend to cover your living expenses while you prepare. Vivian has the paperwork. It was happening too fast. Lucia felt overwhelmed, swept up in Reed's efficiency and decisiveness. I need to think about this. To talk to my mother. Reed nodded, the gesture surprisingly respectful. Of course. But don't take too long. Opportunities like this are rare. The meeting was clearly over. Reed had already turned his attention back to his screens. Vivian appeared at the door as if summoned by some silent signal. Ms. Shaw will give you the details, Reed said without looking up. And Lucia? Don't waste this chance. In a daze, Lucia followed Vivian to a smaller conference room where papers were laid out on the table. Medical consent forms, financial documents, schedules for lessons with Dr. Lin. It was all so thorough, so completely arranged. Does he do this often? Lucia asked as Vivian explained each document. Find random people and change their lives? Vivian looked up, her expression softening slightly. No, this is unusual even for him. She hesitated. I've worked for Mr. Reed for 12 years. He's brilliant, demanding, often difficult, but he recognizes something in you, something important to him. She slid the papers into a folder and handed it to Lucia. My advice? Take what he's offering, but remember who you are. Don't let his vision for you replace your own. As Lucia rode the elevator back down to the lobby, her mind was spinning. 24 hours ago, she had been an ordinary waitress, carrying trays and worrying about tips. Now she held in her hands the possibility of a completely different future. Outside Reed Tower, she paused on the sidewalk, looking up at the gleaming spire stretching toward the clouds. Whatever Reed's true motives, he had opened a door she'd thought permanently closed. The question was, did she dare walk through it? Dr. Lin's home studio was nothing like Lucia had imagined. She had expected something grand and imposing like Reed Tower. Instead, she found herself in a modest apartment in the Arts District, where every available wall space was lined with bookshelves filled with music scores. The living room was dominated by 2 grand pianos positioned face to face. Again, Dr. Lin said, her voice firm but not unkind. The third movement. Pay attention to the dynamics. It had been 3 days since Lucia had accepted Reed's offer, and she was beginning to wonder if she'd made a terrible mistake. Dr. Lin was a tiny woman in her 70s with a spine of steel and ears that missed nothing. 4 hours a day, every day, Lucia sat at one of those pianos while Dr. Lin dissected her playing with surgical precision. You rush when you're uncertain, Dr. Lin observed, tapping her pencil on the music stand. And your left hand is weak from years of neglect. We have much work to do before the audition. Lucia flexed her aching fingers and began again. The piece was Beethoven's Waldstein Sonata, more difficult than anything she'd attempted in her conservatory days. But Dr. Lin insisted she needed repertoire that would showcase both technical skill and emotional range. Better, Dr. Lin nodded as Lucia completed the passage. Now the phrasing in measures 47 through 52. While her days were filled with practice, Lucia's evenings were spent at University Hospital with her mother. True to Reed's word, Elena had been admitted under the care of Dr. Rivera, one of the country's leading lupus specialists. After years of managing symptoms with minimal treatment, Elena was now receiving comprehensive care, including experimental therapies not covered by insurance. "It's like a miracle," Elena had whispered on the second night as they sat together in her private room. "But Mija, I worry about the cost of all this. What does this man really want from you?" It was the question Lucia asked herself constantly. Reed had not contacted her since their meeting at his office. Vivian called daily for progress reports, but Reed himself remained distant, an invisible force reshaping her life. "I don't know," Lucia had answered honestly. "But for now, let's just focus on getting you better." At the end of the first week of lessons, Dr. Lin made tea in her small kitchen while Lucia stretched her cramped hands. The elderly teacher had been a renowned concert pianist in her youth, touring internationally before retiring to teach. Photographs on the wall showed a younger Dr. Lin with famous conductors and composers. "You have a gift," Dr. Lin said as she set a steaming cup in front of Lucia. "Raw and unrefined, but genuine. Many students have perfect technique, but no soul. You have the opposite problem." Lucia wrapped her fingers around the warm cup. "Is that fixable in time for the audition?" "Perhaps." Dr. Lin sat across from her. "But I'm more concerned with what happens after the audition." "What do you mean?" "Alexander Reed is not a patient man. He expects results. If you earn a place in the mentorship program, it will be only the beginning. There will be pressure to advance quickly, to perform, to justify his investment." Lucia looked down at her tea. "You know him well?" "I taught him briefly many years ago," Dr. Lin said. "A talented boy, but his father pulled him from lessons when it became clear he might pursue music seriously. Alexander was changed after that. More driven, more rigid." She paused. "He hears in your playing what might have been in his own life. That's dangerous." "Dangerous how?"
"He may try to shape your path to fulfill his abandoned dreams."
"That would be a mistake." Dr. Lin's dark eyes held Lucia's gaze. "You must play for yourself, not for him." The word stayed with Lucia as she left Dr. Lin's apartment that evening. The city was alive with Friday night energy. People heading to restaurants and shows, couples walking hand in hand, street musicians performing on corners. 3 weeks ago, she would have been at Bellini's balancing trays and smiling for tips. Her phone buzzed with a text from Vivian. "Mr. Reed would like an update on your progress. Dinner tomorrow evening at Bellini's, 8 p.m. Lucia's stomach tightened. "Why Bellini's? Was it some kind of test?" She texted back a simple, "I'll be there," before putting her phone away. When she arrived at the hospital, Elena was sitting up in bed, looking stronger than she had in months. A hint of color had returned to her cheeks. "Dr. Rivera says the new treatment is working," she said as soon as Lucia entered. "My inflammation markers are down for the first time in years." She patted the edge of the bed. "But enough about me. Show me your hands." Lucia held them out. Already her fingertips were developing calluses from the hours of practice. Helena took Lucia's hands in hers, examining them with tears in her eyes. "These hands were made for piano, not for carrying plates," she said softly. "I've always known that. Even when you sold your piano to pay for my treatments. Even when you said you didn't miss playing. I knew." "Mom, no, let me finish." Elena squeezed her daughter's hands. "I've been the anchor holding you in one place. Now it's time for you to sail." Lucia felt tears welling up. "You've never held me back. Everything I did I chose to do. Out of duty. Out of love." Elena smiled sadly. "But not out of passion. Not until now." She released Lucia's hands. "I spoke with Dr. Rivera today. She says once my treatment plan is stabilized, I could be managed as an outpatient. I could come home. That's wonderful." And Elena continued, "I've been thinking. Our house has those 3 little steps to the front door. Difficult on my bad days. Maybe it's time to consider somewhere more accessible." Lucia understood what her mother was saying. The cramped house they'd lived in for the past decade was far from the hospital, far from Dr. Lin's apartment, far from the life that was suddenly opening up before them. "Are you sure?" Lucia asked. "It's all happening so fast." Elena reached for her daughter's face, cupping her cheek. Life changes in an instant, Mija. Sometimes for the worse. Her eyes grew distant, remembering the day of her diagnosis. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, for the better. The next evening, Lucia arrived at Bellini's 15 minutes early, her nerves jangling. She had chosen a simple black dress, one she'd bought for a cousin's wedding years ago, and pulled her hair back into a neat bun. She wanted to look professional, confident, worthy of Reed's investment. The maitre d' recognized her immediately. Ms. Delgado, what a pleasure to see you again. Everyone's been talking about your performance. He lowered his voice. We've had customers asking for you every night. The manager wanted me to tell you there's a position open. Paid performances, not waitressing, whenever you want it. Thank you, Lucia said, genuinely touched. That's very kind. I'm meeting Mr. Reed tonight. Of course. He's already here. This way, please. Reed had reserved a private dining room at the back of the restaurant. As Lucia entered, she was surprised to find not just Reed but a small group of people. Vivian, Dr. Lin, and 3 strangers in formal attire. Reed stood as she entered. Lucia, thank you for coming. Let me introduce you to some people who are interested in your future. The introductions were a blur of important names. The director of the Central City Symphony, the dean of the conservatory Lucia had left, and a representative from a prestigious international piano competition. They had all seen her videos. They had all spoken with Reed. They had all come to hear her play. Tonight? Lucia asked, panic rising in her throat. Here? The restaurant has graciously allowed us use of their piano, Reed explained. Consider it a dress rehearsal for your audition. Lucia looked at Dr. Lin, who gave her a small, encouraging nod. They had been preparing for the audition, yes. But this was unexpected, unprepared, in front of people who could determine her entire future. I'll need a moment, Lucia said, fighting to keep her voice steady. She slipped out of the private room and found a quiet corner in the hallway by the restrooms. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. This wasn't fair. Reed was testing her, throwing her into deep water to see if she would sink or swim. Pressing her hands against the cool wall, Lucia closed her eyes and took several deep breaths. The memory of Dr. Lin's words came back to her. You must play for yourself, not for him. For years, Lucia had set aside her own dreams to care for her mother. Every decision had been shaped by necessity, by duty. Now, for the first time, she had a choice. She could walk out the door, away from Reed's manipulations and expectations, or she could go back into that room and play. Not for Reed, not for those important people, but for herself. The answer, when it came, was surprisingly clear. She wanted to play, not because Reed demanded it, or because it might lead to opportunities, but because music had always been the truest expression of who she was. When Lucia returned to the private dining room, the group had moved to the main restaurant floor where the piano waited. The regular dinner crowd watched with interest, recognizing her from the viral videos. Reed gestured to the piano bench. Whenever you're ready. Lucia sat down, adjusting the bench, taking her time. She was aware of every eye on her, of the phone cameras already coming out, of Reed watching with that intense, calculating gaze. None of it mattered. As she placed her fingers on the keys, the world narrowed to just her and the piano. She began with Bach, clean, structured, precise. The piece Dr. Lin had drilled her on for days. Her technique was improving, but still imperfect. Then, without pausing, she transitioned into Chopin's Ballade No. 1. It was a piece she'd loved in her conservatory days, one that told a story of struggle and triumph, of beauty emerging from darkness. She had not practiced it with Dr. Lin. It was not part of her audition repertoire, but it was the piece that lived in her heart. As she played, Lucia felt something unlock inside her, a door opening to a part of herself she'd kept closed for too long. Her fingers found the keys with growing confidence, drawing out the melody, building to the passionate climax. There were mistakes, moments where her technique couldn't quite achieve what her musical instincts demanded. But there was also raw emotion, genuine artistry. When the final chords faded, there was a moment of complete silence before the restaurant erupted in applause. Lucia looked up to see Reed watching her with an expression she'd never seen on his face before, something like wonder, or perhaps recognition. Dr. Lin approached the piano first, placing a hand lightly on Lucia's shoulder. You played for yourself tonight, she said quietly. That makes all the difference. The symphony director was next, full of enthusiasm and technical questions. The conservatory dean spoke of special programs, accelerated study options. The competition representative handed Lucia a card with a personal invitation. Through it all, Reed remained in the background, watching. It wasn't until later, as the gathering began to break up, that he approached Lucia. "You went off script," he said. There was no anger in his voice, just curiosity. "Yes," Lucia replied simply. "It was better than what we rehearsed." A slight smile touched his lips. Inefficient, but better. Something in his tone made Lucia realize that perhaps Reed understood more than she'd given him credit for. "Thank you," she said, "for everything you've done for my mother. For me." Reed nodded, his usual businesslike manner returning. "The hard work is just beginning. But after tonight, I'm confident my investment will pay off." He paused, though perhaps not in the ways I initially calculated. As he walked away, Lucia felt a strange mixture of gratitude and determination. Reed had opened a door, but it would be Lucia who decided how to walk through it, and where the path would lead. 1 year later, Lucia stood in the wings of the Central City Concert Hall, watching the audience file in. The magnificent space, with its soaring ceiling and perfect acoustics, had intimidated her the first time she'd performed here 6 months ago. Now it felt almost like home. Nervous? Dr. Lin appeared beside her, elegant in a simple black dress, her silver hair swept up in its usual neat bun. "A little," Lucia admitted. "It's a big program." Tonight was Lucia's first solo recital as part of the symphony's Rising Star series. The journey to this moment had been intense, challenging, and occasionally overwhelming. After her impromptu audition at Bellini's, everything had accelerated. The conservatory had created a special advanced study program for her. The symphony had included her in their mentorship initiative. Critics had begun to take notice. "You're ready," Dr. Lin said with quiet confidence. "You've done the work." The work had been grueling. 6 to 8 hours of practice daily, theory classes, music history, technique drills that left her hands cramping. Lucia had moved with her mother to a small, accessible apartment closer to the hospital and the conservatory. Elena was doing better. The experimental treatments had stabilized her condition beyond anyone's expectations. But she still had good days and bad days. "Is she here?" Lucia asked, scanning the audience through the small gap in the curtain. "Front row center, as promised," Dr. Lin replied. "Along with half the staff from Bellini's, if I'm not mistaken." Lucia smiled. Her former co-workers had remained supportive throughout her whirlwind year, attending every performance no matter how small. Thomas had even started taking piano lessons himself. And Reed. Lucia tried to keep her voice casual. Dr. Lin gave her a knowing look. His usual box. With guests. Reed's involvement in Lucia's career had evolved in unexpected ways. After that night at Bellini's, he had stepped back, allowing her to chart her own course rather than micromanaging her progress as she had feared. The financial support continued, tuition, living expenses, her mother's medical care, but he no longer dictated her repertoire or scheduled surprise auditions. Instead, he attended her performances, sometimes bringing influential people from the music world, sometimes coming alone. Occasionally, he would send brief notes with specific observations about her playing, always insightful, never demanding. It was as if he had realized that her talent would flourish better with space to grow on its own. 10 minutes, the stage manager announced, passing by with a clipboard. Dr. Lin squeezed Lucia's arm. "I'll take my seat. Remember what we discussed about the list. Don't rush the cadenzas." Left alone, Lucia closed her eyes and took several deep breaths, centering herself. The program tonight was ambitious. Bach, Beethoven, Chopin, and finally Liszt's notoriously difficult Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2. A year ago, she wouldn't have dreamed of attempting such pieces in public. Now, while they still challenged her, she no longer feared them. The lights dimmed in the hall and a hush fell over the audience. The stage manager gave Lucia a nod. It was time. As she walked onto the stage, the warm applause washed over her. She had learned to take her time approaching the piano, to acknowledge the audience with a graceful bow before sitting. These small rituals helped calm her nerves, allowed her to transition from Lucia the person to Lucia the performer. She caught sight of her mother in the front row, looking healthier than she had in years, her face glowing with pride. Next to her sat Thomas and several other familiar faces from Bellini's. And there, In his private box to the right of the stage sat Reed, watching with that same intense focus she had come to recognize. Lucia took her seat at the magnificent Steinway concert grand, adjusted the bench and placed her hands on the keys. The hall fell completely silent. In this moment before the music began, she always felt a profound connection to every person in the audience, each one waiting, listening, ready to share in the experience she was about to create. She began with Bach's Italian Concerto, her fingers dancing through the intricate counterpoint with precision and clarity. The piece was a conversation between voices, each line distinct yet harmonizing perfectly with the others. As she played, Lucia felt herself relaxing into the music, letting it flow through her rather than forcing it out. The Beethoven sonata that followed was more emotionally demanding, requiring dramatic shifts in dynamics and mood. Lucia had struggled with this piece during practice, finding it difficult to capture the composer's mercurial temperament. But tonight something clicked. She felt Beethoven's passion, his frustration, his triumph as if they were her own. When she struck the final chords, the audience burst into applause before she had even lifted her hands from the keys. During the brief intermission, Dr. Lin found her backstage. "You've broken through," she said, her usually reserved expression softened with emotion. "You're not playing the notes anymore. You're making music." The second half of the program began with Chopin's Ballade No. 4, the piece that had become something of a signature for Lucia. It told a complex story, beginning with simple beauty, building to moments of conflict and turmoil, before resolving in a breathtaking display of technical brilliance. As she played the final page, her fingers flying across the keys in rapid arpeggios and complex figurations, she was no longer conscious of technique or theory or the audience. There was only the music speaking through her. The applause following the Chopin was thunderous, but Lucia barely registered it as she prepared mentally for the list. The Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2 was a showpiece, designed to display both emotional depth and virtuosic skill. Its famous Friska section, with its lightning-fast octaves and dizzying leaps, had been the source of many frustrated practice sessions. As she launched into the piece, Lucia felt a new confidence. The hours of practice, the guidance from Dr. Lin, the support of her mother and friends, even Reed's unexpected faith in her abilities, all of it had brought her to this moment. Her hands moved with assurance, finding the right keys even in the most difficult passages. The music built and built, driving toward its exhilarating conclusion. When she struck the final triumphant chord, the audience was on its feet before the sound had faded. The applause was overwhelming, cheering bravos. A standing ovation that continued as she bowed left the stage and returned for 3 encores. After the final bow, still buzzing with adrenaline, Lucia made her way through backstage congratulations to the small reception area where her mother waited. Elena embraced her, tears streaming down her face. "My beautiful girl," she whispered. "You were magnificent." Thomas and the Bellini's crew surrounded her next, full of excitement and pride. "The restaurant hasn't been the same without you," Thomas said, "but this is clearly where you belong." Dr. Lin approached, accompanied by the symphony director. "We'll discuss the technical aspects tomorrow," she said with a small smile. "Tonight is for celebration." The director shook Lucia's hand firmly. "The board has made a decision," he said. "We'd like to feature you in next season's opening gala. Rachmaninoff's second piano concerto with the full orchestra." Lucia's breath caught. A concerto with the symphony was beyond anything she had dared to hope for so soon. "Thank you," she managed. "I'm honored." As the reception continued around her, Lucia noticed Reed standing quietly at the edge of the room. He had never attended these post-performance gatherings before. Their interactions had remained formal, almost distant despite his ongoing support. Excusing herself, she made her way toward him. He looked different somehow, less rigid, less controlled. "You came," she said simply. Reed nodded. "You played the list differently than you did in rehearsal." Of course he would notice that. "I took a risk. In the moment it felt right." It was. He hesitated, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. "My father attended his first piano recital when he was 72 years old. Mine. Tonight." Lucia glanced around, surprised. "He's here?" "Front row, left side. He said your playing reminded him of my mother's." Reed's voice had an unfamiliar quality. Vulnerability, perhaps. She was a concert pianist in Europe before they married. She gave it up when I was born. My father never spoke of it until tonight. I'm glad he came, Lucia said softly, understanding how significant this was. As am I. Reed straightened slightly, his business demeanor returning. The symphony director mentioned Rachmaninoff for next season. You'll need a different practice schedule, more time with the orchestra. I've spoken with the conservatory about adjustments to your program. Lucia shook her head, smiling. Always planning 10 steps ahead. It's how I built my company. But there was a hint of self-awareness in his tone now, an acknowledgement of his tendency to control. Thank you, Lucia said, meeting his eyes directly. Not just for the opportunity, but for giving me space to find my own way with it. Reed seemed to consider this. I've learned something this year. Efficiency isn't always about the most direct path. Sometimes the scenic route yields better results. He extended his hand formally. Congratulations, Ms. Delgado. You've exceeded all expectations, including your own, as she shook his hand. Lucia realized how far they had both come from that first night at Bellini's. He with his demands, she with her hidden talents. They had changed each other in ways neither could have anticipated. Later that night, as the excitement finally began to fade, Lucia sat with her mother in their small apartment. Elena was tired but happy, her eyes bright with pride. What are you thinking? She asked, noticing Lucia's contemplative expression. Lucia looked around at their modest living room where her upright piano, a gift from Dr. Lin, stood against the wall. Sheet music was scattered across every surface. A calendar on the wall was filled with lesson times, practice schedules, performance dates. This new life, so different from the endless shifts at Bellini's, the constant worry about bills and medical expenses. I'm thinking about chances, Lucia said slowly, how sometimes they come from the most unexpected places. Elena reached for her daughter's hand. Reed gave you a chance, yes, but you were always meant for this. The music was always in you, waiting. Lucia nodded, remembering the moment she had first sat down at the piano in Bellini's. How it had felt like coming home after a long journey. I just needed to find my way back to it. Outside their window, the lights of the city sparkled against the night sky. Somewhere out there was Bellini's, where even now a piano sat in the corner, perhaps waiting for another hidden talent to be discovered. Somewhere was Reed Tower, where a powerful man had learned that some things couldn't be controlled or scheduled or purchased. And here, in this small apartment, was a path neither Lucia nor her mother could have imagined a year ago. A path of music, of healing, of possibilities. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, Rachmaninoff to master, techniques to refine, performances to prepare for. The journey was far from over. But tonight, Lucia allowed herself to simply be grateful for the strange twist of fate that had begun with a demanding customer and a case of mistaken identity. Sometimes, she reflected, the most important turns in life came not from careful planning but from unexpected moments when we're pushed beyond our carefully constructed boundaries, when someone sees something in us that we've forgotten or hidden away and calls it back into the light.